I wanted to play this Cigar from the Hill Rising clip this morning where he's talking about basically some of these strong skeptical arguments that do need to be addressed. And one is basically the government, this is a psyop.
I was inspired to do this segment because I really do believe that this week is a turning point in the discussion of my very favorite topic. 60 Minutes produced a bombshell special on UFOs featuring interviews with Commander David Fravor, his wingman, many others who testified to extraordinary observations of unexplainable vehicles observed in flight. Now, the only downside I find in discussing UFOs is that there seems to be an intense animosity within the community amongst different personalities, amongst debunkers, and many more that detract from a very simple fact. I believe that Lou Elizondo, who was in charge of the DoD's program investigating UFOs, put it best on 60 Minutes.
Imagine a technology that can do 600 to 700 G-forces, that can fly at 13,000 miles an hour, that it can evade radar, and that can fly through air and water and possibly space. And oh, by the way, has obvious signs of propulsion, no wings, no control surfaces, and yet still can defy the natural effects of Earth's gravity. That's precisely what we're saying.
There's something that's been observed by both humans and by our technology, capable of flying in a manner unknown to human science. That's about as extraordinary as it gets. To me, the only question is, what is it? But increasingly, I have observed a backlash to what I'll call the mainstreaming of UFOs. Why now? Why is the Pentagon coming forward? Is this some sort of psyop? Isn't this all just a ploy to raise money for the Space Force? I understand that impulse, given that our government has already lied us into war on faulty intelligence. But it's important to really interrogate that assumption, because I believe right now, resistance to the idea of UFOs remains on mistrust of the institution, which is in possession of the wide body of evidence surrounding what could be one of the greatest mysteries of our civilization. First, I'll state that it is absolutely not impossible this is an all elaborate psyop for more military funding, but that I believe it's extraordinarily unlikely. Gideon Lewis Krause of The New Yorker, he recently wrote this story titled How the Pentagon Started Taking UFOs Seriously. Now, we had him on the show, and I consider it to be the definitive first draft of history as to how exactly those within the five-sided building came to reckon with what was being seen as by airmen of all time during the flight. Now, the history of Project Blue Book and early Pentagon attempts to cover up UFOs are well known. And if you don't know, I encourage you to go read about it. But the modern history of disclosure is very important to understand. It begins in 2007, when then Senator Harry Reid of Nevada had a discussion with Robert Bigelow of Skinwalker Ranch. Now, Reid, who has long been fascinated by UFOs and critically had just become the Senate Majority Leader, called up Senator Ted Stevens. Stevens, who was a senator from Alaska, shared a fascination of UFOs with Reid because he was a pilot in the Second World War and he had reported a UFO encounter. It stayed with him for the rest of his life. Now, Stevens and Reid corralled Hawaii Senator Daniel Inouye. Together, they placed a secret $22 million appropriation in a 2008 supplemental appropriations bill to investigate the phenomenon. The Pentagon pushed back hard. They didn't want any of this. Reid basically pulled rank and said, I'm the most powerful person in the Senate, so you're just going to do it. So from that point forward, the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program, or ATIP, was born, which began studying Robert Bigelow's Skinwalker Ranch and all sorts of crazy stuff, like goblins and dog-like creatures. But, critically, it also hired Lou Elizondo, who you heard from earlier, in 2010. Now,
So I don't want to play, I'll keep playing the clip, but I don't want to play too much at once so we don't get that whole issue as before. But some of the key things he's pointing out there that we didn't touch on is Skinwalker Ranch. So Skinwalker Ranch was actually a big catalyst for, like you said, ATIP and OSAP was the umbrella program. But Bigelow, Bob Bigelow, billionaire aerospace gentleman, he bought Skinwalker and, you know, put up all these cameras, had all these scientists, and had all these incredible things going down. UFO sightings, cattle mutilations. Apparently there was portals that the farmer saw opening up with entities coming out. They don't have that on video, but this was reported on people who worked on the ranch and were involved. So a lot of really bizarre things going on. And now there's this new Secret of Skinwalker Ranch show on the History Channel, which is pretty interesting and out there, but it's a new owner and they're still doing all the same stuff he was doing, but as a show. So I've been keeping an eye on that. But essentially, Skinwalker Ranch, though, is a key thing for people to just check out because it was the impetus for these larger programs. Because what happened was a senior scientist from the Naval or Defense Intelligence Agency, I believe, one of those, and Cigar gets into it, visited the ranch and had a really anomalous, bizarre event happen to them. Goes back to the Pentagon, says there's some serious stuff going on here, and gives the credibility for them to then give money and to actually study this whole ranch and all the phenomena associated. So that's another thing that I just wanted to drop in there that is a key detail, part of all of this whole story and the origin story of these programs.
Elizondo had no opinion on UFOs at the time. He was later promoted to the head of the program in 2010, which turned the program exclusively into the study of the national security implications of UAP, or unidentified aerial phenomena, encounters. It was there that Elizondo became familiar with the encounter he describes in the 60 Minutes clip, and many more, where he came to believe that UFOs are real, but was refused access to the Secretary of Defense repeatedly to brief him on the project and what he found in the Pentagon's files. From there, he was later introduced to Leslie Kean, a journalist who's been investigating UFOs for many years, by former defense official Christopher Mellon. Now, Elizondo briefed Kean on the program. He then resigned and then led to the now famous 2017 New York Times story, which sparked the UFO renaissance of today. Now, I took you through this torturous history for a reason, so you can understand the Pentagon had absolutely zero interest in letting any of this come out. They pushed back against Harry Reid. They tried to bury Lou Elizondo. They never wanted any of this. For it to be a psyop, the people in charge have to be in control. And by all accounts of the principal players involved, they did their damnedest to make sure all of this remained a secret from the public forever. Since then, what has happened instead is not disclosure, but resignation to overwhelming fascination from the public, from people like myself. Now, the Pentagon reassigned a high-level civilian to continue Elizondo's work, and since then, a sieve has opened up, with awareness amongst the U.S. military that they will not be shunned for reporting to their superiors what they see out there. These incidents have been compiled within the Pentagon. They have been leaked to journalists, some of them, like Jeremy Corbell. And here's the critical part. All the Pentagon is doing is just saying, yeah, that's a real video. It's not that they're disclosing it officially. With over 1 million service members, of course things are going to leak. The speed up of information is because of a variety of factors, but it's almost certainly not because of a willful Pentagon effort to put more information out there. The modern history of UFOs, instead, is a much more hopeful story in which the truth was dragged out, and now that it's out there, they just simply don't know how to control the narrative anymore. As Lewis Krauss himself told us here on Rising, if the Pentagon wanted to raise money, there are a whole lot of easier ways in order to do so. Iraq, Afghanistan, terrorism, Russia, China. There's a lot of easier ways to get billions of dollars more in appropriations. Instead, this is a case of people who for a long time tried to deny reality, were then forced to reckon with it, and are now coming clean with us out of necessity. In other words, they're not manipulating us. We are manipulating them. And I did this column because...
I really like that little ending blurb he does.
Yeah, that's
power of the
cool.
people, man. I'm all about this, like people-powered solutions. And this is something where we, the people, even if they control all the money and they control a lot of the resources and et cetera, we still have an ability if we work together. If we use our various mediums, all there's so many people who helped with this. It's not just the New York Times, it's not just 60 Minutes. There's so many other figures in this movement that have helped put pressure on the senators and on various other elements within society. And it's beautiful. It gives a lot of hope to be like, the people can, we can make an effect. We seriously can on something that's really important. So that's in and of itself a beautiful thing to see.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the way you put that forward. And in a sense, I'm also recognizing how I need this. It keeps putting things into place for the way that I perceive information that I'm getting. And specifically, this idea that, I talked about it earlier, that the government is a singular thing that doesn't make mistakes. If this is coming out, they wanted it out there. And the thought that potentially we have to believe that there's not a single event in history that wasn't predetermined and pre-planned. And then there's this other idea that it's not that every event that's ever been reported on is completely fake and like was produced to create a narrative, but that you have the Winston Churchill never let a good crisis go to waste. And that whole idea that if news does come out, sure, start spinning the narrative, use it, in some kind of a way. Like I know for a fact, stories I won't get into, but ways that the COVID-19 event that happened 2020 and is still going on now has been used by people who had no clue that it was coming, but they knew that this is a moment where people are going to be buying stuff. And if you make the right kind of advertisements, you can get people to buy your stuff. And so
Crisis
I guess
capitalism.
the reason, right. And so the reason I want to bring that up specifically is because as I'm watching this, Cigar makes some really good points in there. And I can already hear the skeptics and the cynics saying, well, those are all really cute ideas about how like the government tried to fight against that. But isn't that also potentially part of the grand narrative that they wanted to bring out there? And I really didn't want to go this hard at it in these directions. I didn't think moving into this episode I was going to have so many internal processes like, yeah, but wait a minute. Oh, well, I could poke a hole there. Well, that, could be explained in a different way. And I find myself like my many selves within my many different narratives and things that in the moment, this makes more sense than that. And they're battling. They're at, not at all out war, but they're definitely they're making their presence known, and they're not so unanimous agreement on what's happening here.
Yeah.
And so what I really like here is that this is causing for me to really scour all of the comments and everything to just see like, I'm also a spectator here. I appreciate the way that you got these videos lined up and what we can say about what we're seeing right here. And I'm not going to try and, keep smacking it with this. Like, man, like I want to know. Well, the thing is because it causes me to really ask the hard questions. Like, is media like 60 Minutes? If you were to ask me on most days, I would say, like, they know what they're putting out. They probably have done computer simulations of how people might react on it. They've done probably small screenings to see how people would react, and they want this. They want this for what? And then that's the big question. For what? What is this trying to push humans to buy, to think? How are they supposed to behave? Are we supposed to feel like, man, maybe we do need some more military funding to protect us from whatever this might be? Or maybe it's supposed to get to what Jamie Wheel says in his new book, Recapture the Rapture, when African Americans were going door to door in America to white people's houses, and they would knock on the door, and they would go to other houses as well. But they found that like white people would shut the door on the black people far earlier than, like, let's say Latinos or other groups, except for when they would say, and they would bring up, because maybe they were selling something or some kind of service, except for when they would say, hey, did you hear it has been proven now that extraterrestrials are among us? And not that they had like a document or anything, but just because they would mention that there is something more other than me with a different skin color, that kept the door open far longer. And that created the us and them thing on a larger scale. So
we're both
like,
humans. So all right, now you're on team human. So I'll be less. I'll have less aggression.
It's got many.
And that's
years
part
going.
of this, man, where I'm like very optimistic. Is like, look, everyone knows the famous Reagan speech, and you can argue, well, he wasn't really referring obviously to aliens or extraterrestrials, but the idea of like, I often think of if there was an alien threat, how the world would come together and be unified against it type thing.
I couldn't help at one point in my discussions privately with General Secretary Gorbachev, when you stop to think that we're all God's children, wherever we may live in the world, I couldn't help but say to him, just think how easy his task and mine might be in these meetings that we held if suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet, outside in the universe. We'd forget all the little local differences that we have between our countries, and we would find out once and for all that we really are all human beings here on this earth together. Well, I don't suppose we can wait for some alien race to come down and threaten us, but I think that between us we can bring about that realization. In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bond. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war? I think maybe I'd answer it this way. I keep, in my frustration sometimes, you know, actually, if you count some of the things going on in smaller countries and all, there have been about 114 wars since World War II. But I've often wondered, what if all of us in the world discovered that we were threatened by a power from outer space, from another planet? Wouldn't we all of a sudden find that we didn't have any differences between us at all? We were all human beings, citizens of the world, and wouldn't we come together to fight that particular threat?
Look, like, I want us to come together, not to like all murder and kill some alien threat. That's not, and look, I'm not, like I said, being naive. If that's what happens, like, crap, well, all right, whatever, like, I guess it's the best to roll with the punches here. But ideally, it's like, no, we all, like you said, have a dark night of the soul collectively and say, like, all right, oh wow, like, I do need to step up, and you know, I have like undeniable proof about certain things that give me hope and give me incentive. Like, a lot of people feel like they're, you know, in a machine, and this idea of the Matrix metaphor, and just like a robot for something they don't really believe in, and they feel really like they don't feel fulfillment in work. They don't feel like they have a purpose. They feel this existential angst. And this could help resolve that in a lot of ways. And it could help us really like be the best version of ourselves if we integrate it the right way and we really step up and like are a willing participant with more advanced groups to get our crap together, you know, on this planet. Like,
it is
but it
going
could also
to be
just
a
be like, hey,
catalyst
let's
for
just
change.
shoot nukes at this alien threat, and let's all just be like, let's all kill the alien. And I'm like, oh, I don't think that's the best play either. But both are,
Well,
you know, that's the narrative the military industrial complex, if I'd put money on it, they'd want to try to push for to justify, you know, another war. But now the war is space. It was terrorism, now it's space. And this is what the Fairchild Industries woman talked about. The last enemy will be aliens, she says, that von Braun said. You know, first it's, you know, these various countries, and Iran's the last, and then it's space. Like, this is maybe them trying to control the narrative to have that play out, to have us go fight space wars.
Well,
mean,
you know, honestly, like, so I appreciate you saying that, because part of the whole concept, when we're talking about what is this going to produce in the masses, what kind of effect is this going to produce? And for the most part, if you wanted to really get the masses on board with something, you can use the old model, which is, I mean, all the way back, like way old. You find an enemy and you get the people to be afraid of the enemy. That doesn't mean there isn't that other option, that this is all part of the narrative. Mm-hmm. And it's here not to make us scared of an enemy, but to be awestruck by a superior intelligence or something, like, because if it's AI, if it's aliens, if whatever it is, if it's, you know, and I say aliens, I mean ETs, I don't mean to put such crude terminology on it, but seriously, if it is something from another star system that is so superior that it found its way here, if none of that is even correct, and it's just something that has emerged from here, if it's legit, then it's superior in intelligence. And could that be the reason why we're all finding out about this now? And we're all like, oh, the Pentagon didn't want us to know, but it came out. No, okay, guys, I guess we just have to tell you there is something of massively superior intelligence here, and it doesn't mean us harm. And then, whatever, like,
well, I don't think they know. I don't think they know specifically the agendas. And this is where it gets weird when we can, we're going to probably run out of time to get into on this episode, but like the idea of the secret space program and how much collaboration is going on between possibly ETs and certain U.S. government black operations, unacknowledged special access programs, USAPs. A lot of abductees have talked about there being government and military personnel on the craft sometimes. That was in Richard Dolan's book. So, following that, then there's already some level of collaboration between certain groups, in particular the Greys, and certain elements of what we call maybe the deep state. This unaccountable sort of mixture of corrupt government officials and private contractors. So essentially, though, look, man, like there's a lot of scenarios, and I think it's critical that we do the best we can to not have that crappy narrative of let's all attack and bomb this foreign alien threat, because I do really think, look, at this point, it seems like the dams are breaking. They see that the cracks, major water starting to come through, and they're going, look, we can't control the narrative anymore. We can't suppress this anymore. We can't keep this under wraps, guys. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to get out ahead of it. We need to drip a little, and we need to control the narrative. And they're going to want to, I bet, try to, part of Space Force, be like, look, this is real. It exists. Now we need to validate way more money for us to go into space to defend against these possible extraterrestrial threats. And they're probably really going to try to sell that angle. I think a lot that possibly is part of it, yes, but there's also, I think, really positive elements out there too. And this is really sort of like throwing the baby out of the bathwater to be like, all ETs are negative and here to murder us and kill us, so we should all be terrified and then justify problem reaction solution type stuff. And I think we can't let them play us. We got to really hold them accountable and transparent. Like, no, like we're getting an independent audit of this. We're really taking up, like, we really can't, we got to be mindful now more than ever at this critical precipice point to not let that kind of BS run rampant, to not let this, modern propaganda towards this, to nuclearize space, all the things that would justify massive amounts of money. Think about how much money it's an unlimited paycheck to say, hey, I need a blank paycheck to fight any potential threat from space. And that's infinite. That's never going to run out. They're running out of enemies to make up on planet Earth a lot of ways. The war on terrorism was like this opaque thing of like, who are we really fighting? And when does this end? What's the objective? How does it, and they're kind of realizing, all right, this is kind of a hard sell at this point. We're running out of a really easy, identifiable, like, bad guy. And so this could be the perfect new ticket to justify that. And that does concern me, that as a real, those people are the real ones in a lot of control of this stuff. So they do really have a say, but it gives me hope when people like Mellon and Elizondo and these sort of white hats from within are forcing the hand and are shifting the narrative to a different one. It doesn't seem like, in Cigar's segment, this doesn't seem like the narrative and at this time that the government wanted to do.
Make sure y'all head over to benjosephstewart.com, become a member. You'll have access to the growing library of deeper dives where I talk about all the stuff that I really can't talk about on YouTube. Make sure you get involved in the Discord chat. That's where a lot of the conversation is happening, talking about new theories, being able to interweave into the greater conversation that is how we awaken infinity. That's our highest potential. And I just want to remind you, you are the most powerful technology ever known to creation. Wield it like an artist with a conscience.